Would you all please rise and join me for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, tonight is Monday, February 26, 2018. It's the regular meeting of Town Council. I apologize for my attire, but I just came from coaching my 12-year-old softball team. I'm always looking to recruit, so I thought I'd wear my branded uniform in case there's any other 12-year-old softball players out there looking for. No, I'm joking. I feel compelled to say that. Moving on to roll call. Ms. Lapellis is not present this evening. All other members of council are present, as is our first selectman. We have on the dais, actually we need a few amendments to our agenda. Item D under communications has a scrivener's error with respect to the date. That communication was dated February 25 instead of February 22. And communication E was anticipated to have been sent, but it never did get sent in light of the issues that we had with moving those contracts forward. So I'd ask that the agenda be amended to correct the scrivener's error under communications D and item E be stricken. Do I have a motion? So motion by Mr. Reed, is there a second? Second by Mr. Rooney. Any discussion regarding the amendment to the agenda? All right, seeing none, all those in favor? And against, motion carries 8-0. Thank you. Moving on to the consent calendar. Questions, comments? Mr. Mauer?
Two comments, one on the voting record and one on the minutes. On the first page of the voting record, the consent calendar was passed unanimously. It was actually 6-0 with my abstaining.
It's in there. It's in the body of it.
And then that in the draft minutes it does go to with the abstaining, but it says 6-1, and I was not sure if that should say 6-0 with it. And
601.
601.
Okay.
All right, sorry.
Okay. We'll note, Madam Clerk, you just note those changes. Ms. Martin?
Yeah, I believe the clerk had indicated in the roll call, it says Vice Chairman Lapellis and Councilmember Reed were not in attendance. That would be Chairman Lito was not in attendance with
That's
Mr. Reed.
Which I already-
That's already amended, just to be sure.
Thank you for that. Any further questions or comments? All right, I will ask that those comments be made, and I'll pass the consent calendar noting those amendments. Moving on to communications, there are 4 on our newly amended agenda: A, B, C, and D. I just ask that they be incorporated into the minutes as set forth on the agenda. Moving on to public participation. Are there any members of the public who wish to participate publicly at this time? All right, seeing none, I'll close first public participation. There are no appointments this evening. Action items. First, we have the Town Council Committee on Finance, Education, Health, and Public Safety Matters. I do not have a report from Ms. Lapellis, so I don't know if anybody on that committee would like to give a report.
I'm the chairman of FEPS now.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Rooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have nothing to report. We have not met with the budget in full swing, so
Okay,
I'll have something for you next time.
thank you. Planning and
Mr.
zoning,
Chairman?
public, yes.
May I make a request?
Sure.
So I anticipate that the EMS, in conversations with the chair of the EMS commission and the Town Council liaison, I think they're going to have a final recommendation for the ambulance purchase. I respectfully request that be referred to FEPS for review prior to come to full council.
Absolutely, so ordered on that, thank you. Anything further on that subcommittee? Moving on to B, Planning and Zoning, Public Works, and Parks and Recreation is
That is Mrs.
Ms. Lapellis. Okay, still getting used to my subcommittees, obviously, and my Seahawks outfit. She did not give me a report on that. Any members of that subcommittee wish to comment, Ms. Martin?
Yes, we have not met and do not have a meeting scheduled.
I'm assuming that's based upon our very aggressive budget meeting schedule.
I would assume, yes.
Moving on to C is the Town Council Committee on Legislative and Administrative Matters. Mr. Reed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have not met since the last meeting.
Thank you. Strategic Planning Committees, Mr. Condon?
We have not met since last meeting either.
Typically during budget, our subcommittees don't meet that often, especially during these last 2 weeks, so that's not uncommon. EMS building, I assume is the same,
No,
correct?
Mr. Chairman, we have met.
There we go. Mr. Rennie?
So we did meet, we had representatives from AT&T. As we know, we have the AT&T cow that exists at Fawn Hollow. So we are in this scenario where AT&T is very interested in doing something with the town of Monroe and finding a location. One of the locations that they really like is the location located at the Jackiala Fire Station, which is where we are currently working on the EMS building. So we're just in talks about what they actually need, what they're looking for. So when we actually begin to construct this building based on, we have the feasibility study, when the actual structure comes about, figuring out where it's gonna fit, based on, that'll be in the works in this. Also, we sat, a number of members brought forward some drafts in regards to RFP, or kind of RFPQ. If you would, we're not gonna do a request for qualifications, we're gonna kind of do a combination, request for qualifications and request for proposal at the same time. So we're anticipating, our next meeting, I believe, is March 13th. We're anticipating at that time we should have a draft to move forward to the town attorney to make sure that the language works. So I should have more after that, but that's where we are in the EMS Building Committee. Nothing
Great.
more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Moving on to, as you see, we have a new addition to our action items, which is our Fire Services Study Committee, which has been removed from our unfinished business, just to, thought it was more appropriate to get updates since it's an active committee. Is there an update on that, Mr. Condon?
We have not had an update since the last meeting. We have not met, but, they're still working on the procedures, and they're gonna get us a report by May, June.
Great,
So,
great. So we'll keep that as a subcommittee on our action items so that we can continue to get reports in a more orderly fashion. Moving on to First Selectmen's update, Mr. Kellogg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a written update that is coming down, and there's some copies on the table there for anyone else who'd like them. A few things I wanted to cover tonight. First of all, I just wanted to touch on the issues of school security. Obviously, in light of recent events, tragic events, it is something that's on top of mind, appropriately so. And I know that in the last budget meeting, there was a discussion with Chief Salvatore in regards to some issues that we were addressing relative to school resource officers. And I wanted to just assure the council and the public that, obviously, we've done a lot of security improvements over the years, but it is constantly something that is under ongoing evaluation. I have met recently with the police chief, as well as the superintendent of schools, to support efforts to continue to evaluate security plans. And I would anticipate, I know that they're currently evaluating deployment of school resource officers as well as school security officers. And I expect there to be some further discussion on that. That may or may not involve proposals that would have budgetary impact, but obviously we would certainly keep the council and Board of Finance apprised of that, should it become necessary. But we want to make sure that everyone's aware of where that stood, since especially since there was a discussion at the budget meeting in regards to, particularly, I know there was a leave that was mentioned of one of those officers coming up for military purposes. The second item I wanted to mention is to regretfully have to announce that our Parks and Rec Director, Frank Cooper, has announced that he will be resigning towards the end of March, which is sad for the town, but it's a well-earned retirement for him. He's certainly made great strides for the town in terms of everything he's done, not just for park improvements, maintenance of our grounds, but also programming enhancements, whether it's, you know, the summer concert series and the youth programs that are put on. So he's being very gracious in assisting us during the transition, transition period, even beyond then. So, we'll obviously work very expeditiously to make sure that we get that position filled as soon as possible. The last item, well, actually not the last item, I have two more items I wanted to mention. The last item on your written report, just wanted to address the setting of the mill rate, because there have been some inquiries about that process. I want to make sure it's clear. So one thing is that, again, you're aware of my budgetary kind of guiding principles, which were to make sure we lowered our overall tax burden to the town, and certainly controlling spending was a huge part of that. Taxes would have gone up over 2% if we had simply gone with all the spending requests that came in. But one aspect that I wanted to be sure everyone was clear of was the car tax situation. We have an unusual situation this year in that the car taxes have been set artificially low due to a cap from the state of Connecticut in the past couple of years. The state capped those rates at 32 mils. That was 2 years ago, and I believe in the last budget process there was contemplation of it being changed, but it wasn't done in time for the budget process, and so it remained there. The cap had since been adjusted to where it is now. The cap is higher. The cap is higher than our rate, so we would no longer be subject to that. So in my preparation, that arbitrary cap would no longer apply. My presumption is that we would go back to the one rate that we historically have always had. Now, that would result in a one-time adjustment this year for car taxes, if that were to occur. However, even if the rate had stayed arbitrarily low, we still would have had a reduction in real estate taxes. So I just want to be clear that the overall tax levy is still lower. However, it does present an interesting dilemma in that you've got different people with different scenarios. So the mill rate is assessed obviously by the Board of Finance. That is within their purview. It's done after the budget has been approved by the voters at referendum. So I will continue to work with the Board of Finance and make sure that they're exploring every option out there. The presumption was that we were required to go back to one rate. That may or may not be the case, so we need to look at that further. They need to deliberate on that, because in the end, I want the best possible scenario for all of our taxpayers, and I would encourage them to do that, to look at all the options and make sure that we thoroughly evaluate that. But I just want to make sure that that was understood, because it was something that I realized was probably not, may or may not have been abundantly apparent when you first looked at the presentation. So in that regard, the last item that I wanted to mention was in regards to the one agenda item that I asked you to defer until the next meeting. I know there's a request. So there were a couple of things that were occurring related to the contracts for the concert series. One was I was operating under a presumption that time was of the essence to resolve this evening due to some timing issues with the bookings. It actually had more to do with our own deadlines of production of promotional materials, and we actually can make it work with a couple more weeks. So that kind of sense of so I could have resolved all the other issues that came up today and still gotten it tonight, but I felt if we can use the extra 2 weeks, there was no point in giving you yet another change, because I realize this came out on Sunday, so I'd rather give the council the time to evaluate it. The issue that arose was there was a little bit of a distinction that I don't think was fully understood in regards to those concerts and the insurance coverage that would be required for them. And because that is a town-sponsored event, our KERMA policies would govern, and so the need for those artists to have additional proof of insurance is really not necessary. It was in those riders, so it will be a very simple process to kind of clean up the riders a little bit. And it's so to your an earlier question that came in, this is not going to be another. It's a very minor tweaking of what we need to do here. But it also, I think, gives us a little bit more time to put some of the artists' questions at ease and not require some costly, in the end, it's lowering the cost of the program by ensuring that it's covered under our existing policies. So, sorry for that confusion, but that's the status of that.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Moving on to our unfinished business. What's becoming a dinosaur on our agenda is the Chalk Hill updates, which I promised until we had an ultimate resolution to the use of. I will keep that on the agenda. I'm starting to question whether or not we still need it on the agenda every time I do make the agenda, but I'm trying to keep with my promises, and I'm hopeful at some point, and I think we will be continuing to plan for Chalk Hill through the new administration and through SBC, and should ideas come up or pop up, it's there for discussion. So I don't know if Mr.
Mr.
Collins.
Chairman, the only comment I would add to that is, the municipal space needs assessment RFP is out, and your SBC committee is the governing body. They're the oversight group for that. So I mean, my expectation, it's in the RFP, is that Chalk Hill is included in that assessment. So at some point, it may make sense to roll it into the SBC report, but I just, obviously just bring that up for your consideration if you think it's appropriate in the future to do that.
Good, thank you very much. Any comments? It's an agenda item, Mr. Mauer?
I just would like to state that this is something that I know constituents bring up a lot, what's going on with this building, what's going on with this building, and after the budget, I do believe that this is something that this council should concentrate on to have a true and solid plan before the next budget season.
Anybody else?
That is certainly the goal.
That's the goal of the space assessments.
We all agree. That's why it's there.
Yep.
All right, moving on. That's a lot of discussion around the Chalk Hill. I'm happy
Yeah,
we left
more
it.
than we've had.
Moving on to new business. The first item is the resolution regarding the transfer of funds for the fire truck outfitting equipment, sorry. The resolution, copy of the resolution is here on the dais. May I have a motion to approve the resolution stated as follows: be it resolved that $105,000 be transferred from the general fund to the capital reserve fund and committed for the purchase of fire truck outfitting equipment for the 2018 fiscal year.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Reed, is there a second? Second by Ms. Martin. For discussion, again, we have a memorandum from Mr. Kellogg regarding this transfer. Mr. Kellogg, I don't know if you want to fill us in a little bit by way of introduction.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you. So the three fire departments have worked in a very collaborative effort, and they provided a list of equipment for outfitting the new apparatus. That actually was presented to the Board of Finance several months ago. The Board of Finance asked for some additional information, which they put together and provided at their last meeting. One of the questions that obviously comes up is why is the equipment not part of the vehicle purchase? They have found that by purchasing it, if we purchase it direct, we get it. It's a much more cost-effective purchase, because if you purchase it with the vehicle, all you're doing is basically paying a premium for. They're going to add on cost to basically shop for you. Is what happens. So it is a more cost-effective way of outfitting the equipment. As far as the funding, just to make you, one is not necessarily one is definitely not contingent upon the other, but just to kind of give you some comfort level of I think why Board of Finance was comfortable with this concept is, as we've discussed in the past, there are all but one of the fire apparatus that is going out of service are owned by the town, and those funds would come back to the general fund when they're purchased. There's one vehicle. Most of them are not a significant dollar amount expected, relatively speaking, but one of them was thought to have a decent value. We had a couple of neighboring departments that were very interested in purchasing the ladder truck specifically, because they did not have one at all, and they were in a process of evaluating their long-term needs and felt that they wanted kind of a used vehicle, almost like a starter type of ladder truck, to evaluate their needs before they made the deep dive into a brand-new ladder truck. So our fire chiefs worked really diligently to work with those neighboring departments, who are also our mutual aid partners, to see what they would be willing to do. They found they obtained an offer that was, if anything, exceeded probably the market value based upon the research that they did with various used apparatus brokers and sites and different things, and they could probably give you the specific names of those publications. I don't remember off the top of my head, but the point is, I actually have in my office a signed letter of intent to purchase the existing ladder truck for $250,000 from the Hollyville Fire Department. So that would more than cover the $105,000 here, and obviously the balance would go to the general fund.
Okay. So, thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Questions or comments? Ms. Aguilar?
Mr. Kellogg, the ladder truck that you're referring to, is that the one that was presented to us in the budget that cost $20,000 for yearly maintenance?
I believe,
No.
that is the,
It's the existing ladder truck that's in Stepney right now.
right,
Okay,
right.
okay, thank you.
Any further questions or comments for discussion? All right, seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor and against, that motion carries 8-0. Thank you, Mr. Kellogg.
Thank you.
The only other item of new business on our agenda this evening was the summer series contract resolutions. There were 5 of them. I think Mr. Kellogg covered it in his update as to why we're not proceeding, and somewhat of an abundance of caution, just trying to make sure that we have all of our T's crossed. I want to thank, just as a preliminary matter, I want to thank Mr. Kellogg for continuing to bring contracts such as this to our attention. I can say I do not recall having seen any of these contracts before, although this summer concert series is certainly not in its first year. So I want to thank you for your diligence in bringing those to our attention. I think it's important. I think we all agree that we've had this discussion that while the monetary value and or consideration may not be very significant, I do think that it is well within the purview of town council to be ensuring, as the legislative body of the town of Monroe, that 5 acts that are contractually providing service to the town at our gem of a public facility in Wolf Park are certainly appropriate, at least deemed appropriate by all of the members of council, at least subject to a vote. So I want to thank you for that. And I know that it sounds like we'll be reviewing them in swift order next time. Sir, Ms. Martin?
Number 4, is that anything we should know about?
You certainly don't want to hear me sing, but I'm sure you
I've heard
and other members of
I've
council
heard
may
sounds
have.
of Frank before.
Yeah, you may have your own intent.
They're on tape, too.
You may have your own album of sounds of Frank with different types of sounds.
Just checking.
My wife
Thank
and
you.
children could probably agree with you as well. They may have a better album. Anybody else comments? It's on the agenda,
Are you
so it's
filling in
open
for
for
Enid with
comment.
that comment? Just checking.
I get a kick out of you.
All right, seeing none, second public participation. Would anybody like to participate in the second public participation? All right, before we close, we had a light agenda against budget season. I want to thank everybody for their great attendance and discussion and track record during all of our 2 late nights with budget. I just want to throw it out there right now. We are scheduled to meet on Wednesday at 6:30. Is that a problem for anybody? And does anybody think that we need to adjust the time based upon any independent research you may have done that would require us to have more time? No. All right, good. So 6:30 Wednesday. And again, as Mr. Bernofsky said, our goal will be to get a budget, our motions voted on, discussed, and get everything wrapped up so that we can have a number as soon as possible in that evening. All right. So with that, a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Condon, second by Mr. Mauer. All those in favor? Motion carries 8-0. See you all Wednesday.